Picture this. A hard-working woman walks into her office ready to face another long day at work. But instead of recognition for her efforts, her boss humiliates her in front of everyone by dumping a soda over her head. The laughter, the whispers, the shame. It was unbearable. But what nobody in that office knew was that her husband wasn't just any man. He was the CEO of the company. And when he arrived, justice came crashing down like a storm. What happened next shocked everyone in the building. If you believe in standing up for what's right, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will leave you breathless. Picture an office where ambition collides with arrogance every single day, and in the middle of it stands Janelle Carter, a hard-working black woman who has spent nearly 4 years pouring her dedication, intelligence, and late nights into a company that barely notices her worth. A place where her quiet strength has been overlooked and her achievements stolen by others, and worst of all, where her own boss, Richard Holloway, a tall, smug man with slicked-back gray hair and a cruel smirk, seems to find endless pleasure in making her the target of his jokes and humiliations. On that fateful Tuesday morning, Janelle walked in wearing her best navy blazer, clutching her coffee, prepared to deliver the client presentation she had meticulously crafted, hoping perhaps this time her effort would be recognized. But instead, Richard tore through her slides with disdain, sneering at details that weren't even mistakes, and when she kept her composure despite his passive-aggressive comments, he escalated, throwing out the words, "you people," in a tone heavy with the unspoken bias that had shadowed every interaction she'd had with him, until finally, after the meeting ended and employees dispersed, Richard cornered her in the hallway with a soda can in his hand, looked her directly in the eyes with that malicious grin, and deliberately tilted the can, pouring the cold, sticky liquid over her head as gasps and muffled laughs echoed from colleagues who stood frozen between fear and discomfort, leaving Janelle drenched, humiliated, her blazer ruined, her pride aching. And yet she refused to cry. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break, so she straightened her back, dabbed her face with a tissue, and walked silently to the restroom, while Richard's mocking voice followed her, saying, "Don't be late for the next meeting, sweetheart." But what Richard didn't know, what none of the employees knew, was that the woman he had just drenched in soda was not just any employee. She was the wife of the company's true power, the CEO himself, and in only a matter of hours, Richard's reign of cruelty and mockery would come crashing down in a way that no one in that office could have imagined. As Janelle stood in the restroom, trying to pat her soaked clothes dry with paper towels that tore uselessly in her hands, her mind replayed the humiliation again and again, the soda dripping down her face, the stifled laughter, Richard's mocking tone, and though she had endured countless slights before, this one felt different, heavier, unbearable, and she whispered to her reflection in the mirror, "Enough is enough," unaware that at that very moment her husband, Donovan Carter, the quietly powerful CEO of the very corporation that owned Hudson and Grant Marketing, was on his way to the office for a surprise visit after receiving a call from a major investor, a visit no one had anticipated, least of all Richard. Donovan was a man whose presence commanded rooms without effort, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, with eyes that saw through lies and arrogance alike, and though he often remained in the background, letting managers handle their domains, his devotion to Janelle was fierce and unshakable. So when he arrived earlier than expected and walked past the cubicles, employees fell silent, whispers rippling as they wondered why the CEO himself was here, and in that tense quiet, Richard swaggered into the lobby, still smug from his so-called joke, only to freeze when he saw Donovan greeting the receptionist. Warmly, because suddenly the pieces clicked. Donovan's last name, the rumors of his wife who worked in the building, the way Janelle always carried herself with quiet dignity, and panic flickered across Richard's face. But Donovan hadn't yet seen Janelle. He only noticed the nervous silence and the strange looks exchanged among employees, until one young intern, unable to stomach the injustice she'd witnessed, blurted out nervously, "Sir, something happened to Mrs. Carter." And in an instant, Donovan's expression darkened, his calm composure sharpening into steel as he demanded, "Where is she?" before striding down the hallway with a force that made people step aside instinctively. And when he pushed open the restroom door and saw his wife, her clothes stained, her hair damp, her pride trembling but unbroken, his jaw tightened, his fists curled, and he whispered, "Who did this to you?" While Janelle, holding back tears, simply shook her head and said, "Don't worry about me." But it was too late, because the storm had already been unleashed, and Donovan Carter was not a man who let cruelty go unpunished. Donovan's anger spread through the office like a silent thunderstorm, every step he took radiating authority as he led Janelle out of the restroom and into the open floor where employees watched with wide eyes. And when Richard tried to laugh it off, stammering, "It was just a harmless joke, sir, she's overreacting," Donovan's voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and steady. "You poured soda on my wife and dared to humiliate her in front of this entire office, and you call that harmless?" The weight of his words silenced even the whispers, and when Richard tried to defend himself further, Donovan didn't raise his voice. He simply called over the head of HR and ordered, "Gather every department head in the boardroom now," while Janelle stood beside him, no longer alone, her dignity shielded by the man whose presence made everyone's arrogance crumble. And in that moment, Richard finally realized he wasn't facing just a woman he could mock. He was facing the wrath of the man who had the power to end his career in a single breath. Inside the boardroom, the tension was unbearable as Donovan stood at the head of the table, his hand resting protectively on Janelle's shoulder, and with a voice firm enough to shake every ounce of arrogance in the room, he declared, "Any company that allows disrespect toward its employees, especially toward my wife, has no place in my vision for the future." Before turning his gaze on Richard, who sat pale and trembling and delivering the final blow, "You're finished here, effective immediately, and anyone who laughed or stayed silent while this happened can consider themselves done as well." The words hitting like thunder as gasps rippled through the room, resignation letters practically writing themselves in the faces of those who had stood by, and as security escorted Richard out, his smirk replaced by shame, Donovan turned to the remaining employees and said calmly, "This office will be rebuilt on respect, not cruelty." While Janelle, finally free of the humiliation that had weighed on her moments ago, lifted her chin with quiet pride, knowing that justice had not only been served but had burned through the room so fiercely that no one would ever forget the day the CEO showed up, stood beside his wife, and fired everyone who had dared to stand against her.